The night before my deployment, I overheard my family planning what they would do with the money if I didn't come back alive. Not grieving. Not praying. Planning. I stood in the hallway outside my parents' kitchen, my duffel bag still slung over my shoulder, and listened to my younger sister laugh about a life insurance policy they had secretly taken out on me. $400,000 if I died in combat. $200 if it was non-combat related. Honestly, she said, with Danielle volunteering for the most dangerous assignments, it's practically guaranteed. That was the moment Lieutenant Colonel Danielle Prescott stopped being a daughter. That was the moment I became a liability to my own blood. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me ask you something. Have you ever discovered that the people you loved were quietly rooting for your failure? If you have, you're not alone. And if stories about setting boundaries and reclaiming your life resonate with you, hit like and subscribe. Because what happened next changed everything. Looking back, the red flags were there long before that night. I just didn't want to see them. I built my career in the Army the hard way. No legacy connections. No shortcuts. I enlisted at 18 after earning scholarships I didn't use because my parents made it clear my younger sister, Melissa, would need more support. She had always needed more support. More understanding. More patience. More money. I was the responsible one. The reliable one. The one who could handle it. So I handled it. I handled working 2 jobs in high school. I handled sending money home during basic training. I handled covering Melissa's rent when she dropped out of community college for the 3rd time because she was finding herself. What I didn't handle was asking why the burden always landed on me. Over the years, I wired thousands of dollars home. When my parents said the roof needed repairs, I sent money. When Melissa's car broke down, I paid for it. When Dad hinted that retirement was looking tight, I increased my monthly transfers without hesitation. I told myself it was loyalty. Family takes care of family. That's what I believed. But slowly, the tone changed. When I visited home in uniform, Melissa would smirk and say, "Must be nice having taxpayers fund your life." My promotions were met with half smiles. My commendations were brushed off. When I made major, my father said, "Well, just don't get cocky." It was never pride. It was always caution. Or indifference. Then the questions started getting strange. Melissa began asking detailed things about military death benefits. "So what happens if something happens to you overseas?" she'd say casually over dinner. "Do parents get compensated? Or is it just spouses?" She wasn't married. I wasn't married. I didn't think much of it at first. Curiosity, maybe. But she'd press for specifics. "Is it automatic? Do they investigate? How fast does the payout happen?" My mom would listen quietly, nodding along. My dad would clear his throat and say something about not wanting to think about worst-case scenarios. But nobody ever asked about my mission. Nobody asked what I'd be doing. Nobody asked what I was excited about. The focus was always on what could go wrong. About 2 months before deployment, my parents suddenly started talking about remodeling the kitchen. My dad mentioned looking at a newer truck. Melissa posted photos online of a designer handbag I knew she couldn't afford. When I asked casually how they were managing financially, my mom waved it off. "We've had some investments mature." I didn't question it. I should have. The night before I left, I stopped by to say goodbye. I had texted ahead, but no one answered the door. I used my spare key and stepped inside quietly. Their voices drifted from the kitchen. I almost called out. Instead, I heard my name. I froze. It's active now, Melissa said. Combat doubles it. And with her record? It's not like she plays it safe. My heart started pounding before I even understood why. You forged everything clean? My father asked. Yeah. She signs so much paperwork, it was easy to replicate. And she never checks her credit. She trusts us. My mother laughed softly. At least if she dies, it won't be for nothing. For nothing. I felt the words physically hit my chest. My entire career. Every sacrifice. Reduced to a return on investment. They talked numbers like they were discussing stocks. They speculated about timelines. My sister said, honestly, she's stubborn enough to get herself killed trying to prove something. My dad replied, she always has been. And then they laughed. That laugh. It was light. Casual. Familiar. The same laugh I'd grown up hearing during family movie nights. The same sound that used to mean safety. Now it meant betrayal. I backed away silently, my boots barely touching the hardwood. I walked out the front door without saying goodbye. I sat in my car for 10 full minutes staring at the porch light, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood. But I hadn't. They had taken out a private life insurance policy on me without my knowledge. They had forged documents. They were banking on my death. That night I didn't sleep. I replayed childhood memories with a new lens. The time Melissa broke a window and blamed me. The time I was grounded because she skipped school. The countless times I was told, you're stronger. You can handle it. I wasn't stronger. I was convenient. I was the one who could be sacrificed. By morning, something inside me had shifted permanently. The dutiful daughter was gone. In her place was a woman who finally understood her value had always been transactional. On the flight overseas, my phone buzzed with messages. We're so proud of you. Stay safe. Call us when you land. I deleted them all. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I made one decision. I was done funding my own exploitation. When we landed, I changed my emergency contacts. I froze my credit. I called my bank from base and reviewed every transaction from the past 2 years. What I found made my stomach turn. Small withdrawals. Unauthorized credit inquiries. A pattern of identity usage that went far beyond the policy. They hadn't just planned to profit from my death. They'd been profiting from my life. Something hardened in me during those first weeks overseas. And strangely, it made me better at my job. Focused. Sharper. Detached. I stopped calling home. I stopped sending money. I stopped performing the role of provider. And for the first time in my life, I started building something that belonged only to me. The deployment that was supposed to be their payday became my awakening. They had gambled on my death. They didn't realize they had just freed me. And when I came home, it wouldn't be to the same Danielle Prescott who left. It would be someone they no longer controlled. By the second month of deployment, the silence between me and my family had stretched long enough to make them nervous. At first the messages were gentle. Haven't heard from you. Just checking in. We're worried. Then the tone shifted. It's not like you to ignore us. Family sticks together. What did we do to deserve this? I read every text without responding. Not because I was cruel. Not because I didn't feel anything. But because I finally understood that every word they sent was motivated by fear, not love. They weren't worried about my safety. They were worried about their investment. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening. Without the constant emotional drain of home, my performance sharpened. I volunteered for additional responsibilities. I completed advanced tactical certifications ahead of schedule. I trained harder. I slept better. My squad leader pulled me aside one afternoon after a successful field operation. "Prescott, you've leveled up," he said. "Whatever changed back home, keep it." I almost laughed at the irony. The thing that changed back home was that I finally stopped trying to earn love from people who saw me as a payout. Around that same time, I decided to dig deeper into my finances. Not casually. Systematically. I scheduled a secure call with my bank's fraud department. I requested a full audit of my accounts dating back 3 years. What surfaced was worse than I expected. Recurring transfers slightly higher than I remembered authorizing. Micro-withdrawals disguised as service fees. 2 credit inquiries from a state I hadn't visited in over a decade. Someone had opened a secondary line of credit using my information. My chest felt tight as the fraud specialist calmly explained, "Ma'am, unfortunately identity misuse by family members is more common than people think, especially when military personnel are deployed." The words were clinical. The impact was not. They hadn't just taken out a policy hoping I'd die. They had been siphoning from me while I was alive. That night I sat on my bunk and made a list. Freeze credit. Cancel automatic transfers. Change passwords. Remove them from every emergency document. Update beneficiaries. I designated a veterans relief organization as my sole beneficiary. If anything ever happened to me, no one in my biological family would see a dime. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. It was reclaiming agency. When the transfers stopped, the reaction was immediate. Within days my phone filled with escalating messages. "Did something happen to your account? The mortgage bounced. We thought you increased your monthly help." Then the guilt crept in. "Your father is under a lot of stress. Melissa is struggling. After everything we've done for you," that line almost made me laugh. Everything they'd done for me. They had done plenty. They had conditioned me to believe my worth was measured by usefulness. They had trained me to accept exploitation as loyalty. They had perfected the art of emotional leverage. 3 months into deployment, the calls turned frantic. I received a voicemail from my father. His voice sounded strained. "Danielle, I don't know what's going on, but we need to talk. The bank says there are issues with documentation on some policies. It's probably a mistake, but we need you to confirm a few things." Policies. Plural. My pulse slowed, not quickened. I had already reported the unauthorized life insurance policy through legal channels on base. Quietly. Professionally. I didn't confront them. I let the paperwork speak. Insurance companies investigate forgery seriously, especially when military fraud is involved. I didn't know how far it would go. I didn't care. Actions have consequences. During downtime, while others FaceTimed spouses or children, I wrote in a journal. Not about them. About me. About who I was becoming without their shadow over my shoulder. I realized something unsettling. I wasn't grieving the loss of my family. I was grieving the illusion of them. The version of parents who would have chosen my safety over money. The version of a sister who would have cheered my survival instead of calculating odds. Those people had never existed. I had created them to survive childhood. 6 months in, my commanding officer recommended me for advanced leadership training. You're steady under pressure, she said. You don't get distracted. If she only knew. The ultimate distraction had been removed from my life. The constant obligation. The financial drain. The emotional performance. In its absence, clarity emerged. I began mentoring younger soldiers who struggled with family pressure. I recognized the signs immediately. The apologetic tone when asking for leave to handle someone else's crisis. The shame when they couldn't send money home. I didn't share my story, but I told them something I wished someone had told me at 19. You are not a retirement plan. You are not a solution to other people's irresponsibility. 7 months into deployment, I got a message from Melissa using a new number. Mom is sick. For real this time. She's in the hospital. If you have any decency left, call. I stared at the screen for a long time. Was it true? Possibly. Was it manipulation? Also possible. The problem was that both could coexist. Someone can be sick and still be manipulative. I didn't call. Instead, I verified through a third party. A distant cousin confirmed my mother had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Late stage. 6 months to a year at best. I felt something shift in my chest. Not heartbreak. Not relief. Something neutral. Information. Just information. That night I asked myself a question I'd been avoiding. If she died tomorrow, would I regret not reconciling? I searched for the honest answer. The truth surprised me. I would regret never having a mother who chose me. But I would not regret protecting myself from someone who didn't. There's a difference. One is loss. The other is boundary. 8 months in, the insurance investigation apparently reached them. My father left a voicemail that was half anger, half panic. Why would you do this? They're accusing us of fraud. We were just trying to make sure you were covered. Covered. That word almost made me laugh out loud. I had been covered. Covered in betrayal. Covered in forged signatures. Covered in debt I didn't authorize. I deleted the voicemail without responding. The most unexpected part of that deployment wasn't the conflict overseas. It was the peace I felt internally. Every day I woke up with a single mission: survive and lead well. There was no second mission of sustaining a family system that required my sacrifice to function. My squad became my family in the truest sense. We trained together. Ate together. Watched each other's backs. No one there benefited from my death. They depended on my life. When the deployment ended, I made a deliberate choice. I requested reassignment across the country. New base. New chain of command. No proximity to my hometown. I wasn't running. I was designing distance. On the flight home, I didn't feel dread. I felt resolve. The Danielle Prescott who had left had still believed she could fix everything if she tried harder. The Danielle returning understood that some systems collapse when you stop feeding them. And that's not your fault. Back stateside, I continued severing ties professionally. I finalized disputes on fraudulent accounts. I received confirmation that the unauthorized life insurance policy had been voided due to forged documentation. The company thanked me for reporting it. I wondered briefly how my parents explained that collapse financially. Then I stopped wondering. It was no longer my concern. Within a year, I was promoted again. My performance reviews highlighted composure, integrity, and decisiveness. Words that once would have meant little to me now felt earned. I built friendships that were rooted in mutual respect. I stopped checking my phone for family messages. I stopped anticipating guilt. The silence became normal. Then, almost a year and a half after that night in the kitchen, Melissa called again. Different tone this time. Not angry. Not manipulative. Small. "We lost everything when you cut us off," she said. "Mom's treatment drained savings. Dad's drinking. The house is probably going to be sold." I listened quietly. Not cold. Just steady. "You lost access to my money," I replied. "That's not the same as losing everything." She didn't argue. For the first time in her life, she didn't deflect. She just said, "I didn't think you'd actually walk away." That sentence told me everything. They never believed I would choose myself. As I hung up that call, I realized something profound. They had gambled on my death because they assumed my loyalty was unconditional. They assumed I would never remove myself. They assumed wrong. And that assumption had been their real mistake. 5 years after the night I stood in that hallway listening to my family calculate the price of my death, I stood at attention while a silver eagle was pinned to my uniform. The October air was crisp. The formation was tight. My name echoed across the base as the announcer read my record aloud. Lieutenant Colonel Danielle Prescott, promoted to colonel. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was earned. My chosen family stood in the front row. Soldiers I had led through deployments. Mentors who had invested in my growth. Friends who had never once measured my worth in dollar signs. Not a single member of my biological family was there. Their absence didn't ache. It didn't sting. It felt correct. After the ceremony, we gathered for a small reception. My former squad leader, now a sergeant major, raised a glass. "To Danielle," he said. "Who figured out that leadership isn't about who shares your DNA. It's about who shows up when it counts." Everyone laughed. I smiled. Because it was true. That night, sitting alone in my office reviewing transition paperwork, I allowed myself to reflect on the journey. I had survived 2 more deployments. Earned commendations I once believed my parents would finally be proud of. Built a career grounded in discipline and clarity. But the biggest promotion wasn't rank. It was identity. I was no longer the daughter trying to earn approval. I was a woman who understood that self-respect sometimes requires distance so absolute it looks like cruelty to outsiders. About a year after my promotion to colonel, I received a thin envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping announcing my advancement. Beneath it, written in familiar handwriting, were 3 words, "We're proud of you." It was signed, "Love, Mom." I stared at it for several seconds. Not in confusion. In disbelief at the audacity. Pride is easy when it costs nothing. Pride is convenient when there's no more money to extract. I fed the note into my office shredder and returned to work. 3 months later, my aide knocked on my door. "Ma'am, there's a woman here insisting she's your sister." My stomach didn't drop. It didn't twist. It remained steady. 5 minutes, I said. Melissa walked in looking smaller than I remembered. Life had etched reality across her face. The designer handbags were gone. The sarcasm was gone. The entitlement was gone. She sat across from my desk like someone reporting to authority. "Mom passed last week," she said quietly. "Pancreatic cancer. The funeral is Thursday." "I'm aware she was sick," I replied. "She wanted to see you before she died." "She had years to choose that," I said calmly. Melissa swallowed. She regretted what happened. Did she cancel the policy? I asked. Silence answered for her. Regret without correction isn't regret, I continued. It's discomfort. Melissa's composure cracked. We were desperate about money. And you chose to solve that desperation by hoping I'd die in combat. Her eyes filled with tears. We never thought you'd actually walk away. That sentence echoed. They never believed I would leave. They never believed I would remove access. They never believed I would choose myself over family obligation. I'm sorry for your loss, I said, and I meant it. Death is final. But so is betrayal. I won't be attending. She was still your mother. She was someone who took out a policy on my life and laughed about it. That forfeits the title. Melissa looked around my office. The awards. The command plaques. The photos of my unit. You really don't feel anything? She asked. I feel clarity. When she left, I sat quietly for a moment. No grief surfaced. No second guessing. The mother I once needed had never existed. I had grieved her long before she died. In the weeks that followed, I heard through distant channels that the house had been sold. My father had moved into a smaller apartment. Melissa was juggling multiple jobs. The financial stability they once built on my back had dissolved without me. I did not celebrate that fact. I did not mourn it. I simply recognized it as consequence. Years passed. My responsibilities expanded. I mentored young officers navigating their own complicated family dynamics. I never shared the full details of my story, but when one of them confessed, "Ma'am, I feel guilty for not sending more money home," I told her something I wish someone had told me at 19. Support is generous. Obligation is different. Make sure you're not confusing the two. 7 years after that hallway conversation, I stood once again in formation, this time for my promotion to full colonel. The same steady October air. The same precision. As the insignia was secured, I felt something close, not open. A chapter sealed. The girl who once believed loyalty meant self-erasure would not recognize the woman standing there now. After the ceremony, I walked alone for a few minutes across base housing. The sky was clear. The stars sharp. I thought about the kitchen laughter. The forged signatures. The calculated conversations. They had gambled on my death believing I would never gamble on myself. They lost. The greatest revenge wasn't confrontation. It wasn't legal action. It wasn't even cutting contact. It was building a life so structured, so disciplined, so independent that their betrayal became irrelevant to my daily existence. I did not need their apology. I did not need their approval. I did not need their pride. I needed my survival. And I chose it. If you've ever discovered that someone close to you valued what you could provide more than who you are, you understand the weight of that realization. If you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect, you know how lonely that decision can feel. But here's the truth. Boundaries are not cruelty. Distance is not betrayal. And walking away from exploitation is not abandonment. It is alignment. So let me ask you something. If you had overheard that conversation the night before deployment, what would you have done? Would you have confronted them? Pretended not to hear it? Cut contact immediately? I want to know. Drop your answer in the comments. If this story resonated with you, hit like so more people who need to hear it can find it. And subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, resilience, and rebuilding your life on your own terms. Because sometimes the most powerful victory isn't proving them wrong. It's surviving long enough to prove yourself right.